Sariputra, the foremost disciple among the Buddha's 10 principal disciples and renowned as the wisest, is said to have mastered the Abhidharma at the age of 7 and attained proficiency in all worldly knowledge by the age of 16, demonstrating unparalleled intellectual ability. He is regarded as one of the most enlightened sages in Buddhist history. On this day, within the monastery, incense smoke gently curled and golden sunlight filtered through the curtains, falling upon the Buddha. Shariputra suddenly stood up, faced the Blessed One, and posed a question that astonished the assembled monastics. "The Buddha, you often teach us to be selfless and egoless. Yet why do you also encourage beings to take refuge in the three jewels? Are these two not contradictory?" This question, once posed, is like a large stone cast into the still surface of Jingling Lake, stirring ripples upon ripples. The assembly of monks looked at one another in silence, earnestly contemplating and speaking in hushed tones, all feeling confused and perplexed. The state of helplessness is the gateway to liberation. Yet taking refuge in the three jewels seems to fall back into the realm of conditioned phenomena. What, ultimately, is the relationship between the two? The Buddha's countenance is serene, with a gentle smile. His eyes are like blazing jewels, penetrating all things with profound insight. He spoke slowly. "Well said, Sariputra. This question is profoundly insightful, directly pointing to the essential core of spiritual practice. Before addressing this question, may I ask you, did you encounter anything yesterday when you went out that stirred your heart?" Shariputra paused briefly and replied, "World-honored one, yesterday when I went out in the city, I met an old woman, walking with difficulty, clearly in great pain." He confided to his disciples that he had suffered from a foot ailment for many years, making walking difficult, with each step feeling as painful as being cut by a knife. He asked his disciple, since the Buddha's teachings encourage letting go of attachments, should he then ignore this suffering and let it unfold? The Buddha wiped his brow and asked, "How do you respond?" Shariputra replied, "I would tell him that letting go of attachment does not mean abandoning treatment. Suffering is the result, disease is the cause. If the cause is not eradicated, suffering will be endless." The disciple advised him to seek medical treatment and actively undergo therapy to alleviate his suffering. A glimmer of approval flashed in the Buddha's eyes as he asked, "Then, do you think your answer contradicts the doctrine of non-self?" Sariputra pondered for a moment and shook his head, saying, "It does not contradict, because the treatment of illness is intended to alleviate suffering, not to become attached to the illness itself. If one refuses treatment out of fear of attachment, would it not be like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, putting the cart before the horse?" The Buddha continued to ask, "Then, do you think the elderly lady should trust the doctor and follow the medical advice?" Sariputta replied without hesitation, "She certainly should trust. If one does not trust the doctor, how can effective treatment be obtained? If one does not follow the doctor's advice, how can the illness be cured?" As soon as these words were spoken, Shelifu suddenly experienced an awakening, a glimmer of understanding flashing in his eyes. He seemed to understand the Buddha's intent, yet felt there was a deeper, ineffable meaning that was difficult to express. At this moment, a young novice monk raised his hand and asked, "World-honored one, this disciple also has doubts." As Venerable Sariputra said, "The old woman requires successive lifetimes to be healed, but doctors are also ordinary people and may inevitably have oversights or even misdiagnosis. Is this kind of trust not also a form of attachment? If a doctor's judgment is mistaken, wouldn't it be counterproductive and worsen the condition?" A gentle breeze sweeps by, rustling the leaves of the Bodhi tree. The Buddha looked kindly at the novice monk and said, "You have asked very well. This reminds me of an ancient story about an Indian youth named Agasa." The monks, both from China and Sri Lanka, all pricked up their ears and listened attentively in silence. The Buddha rarely recounted secular stories, but whenever he did, they were imbued with profound meaning. Agasha was born into a poor family, but he was intelligent and eager to learn. He yearned to change his destiny, so he traveled far and wide to seek knowledge and pay respects to renowned masters. However, the teachers he encountered varied greatly in their level of expertise, and some were merely individuals seeking fame and reputation. Consequently, Agastya felt confused and disappointed, and he began to doubt whether he could truly change his destiny through learning. One day, Agastya encountered a true knower, an ascetic hermit dwelling in the mountains. The ascetic told him that while acquiring knowledge is indeed important, it is even more crucial to learn to discern truth from falsehood and distinguish right from wrong. The ascetic taught him not to blindly trust anyone, including teachers, but to use his own wisdom to discern and reflect. The ascetic also told him that true knowledge does not come from books, but from inner awakening. Agastya was deeply inspired after listening to the words of the ascetic. He began to reflect on his past methods of study. He realized that he was overly dependent on his teacher and had neglected his own contemplation. He began to attempt to use his own wisdom to comprehend knowledge and discern right from wrong. He realized that true knowledge is not rote memorization, but thorough understanding and flexible application. After a period of time, more importantly, he learned to think independently and discern right from wrong. He ultimately became a renowned scholar and made significant contributions to society. The story of Ajatasattu teaches us that while trust is indeed important, blind trust should be avoided. We must use our own wisdom to discern and contemplate in order to avoid being misled. At the same time, we must also trust our own hearts and believe in our ability to discover the truth. After the Buddha finished telling the story of Agastya, his gaze returned to the novice monk, and he asked, "What have you realized from the story of Agastya?" The novice contemplated for a moment and replied, "I have realized that trust requires wisdom and discernment. We must not blindly trust anyone, including doctors. We should use our own wisdom to discern and reflect. At the same time, we must also trust our own hearts and have confidence in our ability to discover the truth." The Buddha praised with a gesture and then continued, "Now, I will tell you a story about a merchant. There was a merchant who was immensely wealthy, yet he was constantly anxious and restless, unable to find peace day or night. He was worried that his valuables would be stolen, so he hid his money under the bed and slept with gold and silver as his pillow. However, he was always paranoid, fearing the visitation of thieves, and could not sleep at night. Later, he heard that there was a local money exchange with an excellent reputation, known for its safety and reliability. Thus, he deposited his wealth in the bank and entrusted it for safekeeping. From that moment on, he could finally sleep peacefully, no longer troubled by concerns over material possessions. The novice monk asked again, "World-honored one, although this merchant no longer worries about wealth, he still depends on the bank and remains attached to material possessions. Isn't this just shifting from one attachment to another?" The Buddha's voice remained calm, flowing like a clear spring. "So, tell me, is the merchant more attached or more at ease? He hides his valuables under the bed, living in constant anxiety and fear all day long. What kind of state is this? He deposits his wealth in the bank, sleeps peacefully, and no longer worries. What kind of state is this? Which state is closer to liberation and greater freedom?" Within the monastery, there was profound silence, and all the monks were immersed in deep contemplation. They began to reflect on their own practice and reconsider their understanding of attachment. A sudden gleam flashed in Shariputra's eyes, as if he had grasped a crucial clue. He wanted to speak, but felt that further reflection was needed to clearly express the thoughts in his heart. At that moment, the Buddha raised his hand, stopped Shariputra, and said, "Wait, Shariputra. Before you express your insights, I would like to ask everyone present. When you heard the story of the merchant, what came to your mind? What did you see in it? What did you realize?" An elder bhikkhu spoke first, saying, "I reflect that although the merchant still cares about his wealth, he has changed his approach. Originally, he was bound by his finances, unable to find peace throughout the day. Later, he chose to trust the bank and, as a result, gained freedom. Does this imply that some actions which appear to be attachments might actually be the beginning of letting go? That some behaviors seemingly binding may, in fact, be the path to liberation? The Buddha smiled silently, his gaze turning towards Sariputra, encouraging him to continue reflecting. A subtle expression of realization also appeared on Sariputra's face. He seemed to understand the Buddha's intention, but he still felt confused and believed there were deeper meanings that needed further exploration. At that moment, a deeper question arose in his heart. Shakyamuni, does this story imply a deeper truth? Faith in the moneylender and taking refuge in the three jewels, relinquishing wealth and practicing without attachment. There seems to be a subtle connection between them. But what exactly is this connection? Is taking refuge in the three jewels truly the beginning of countless paths? Is the realm of the innumerable truly beyond reach? The Buddha's gaze became extraordinarily profound, as unfathomable as the vast starry sky. He spoke slowly, saying, "Well said, renunciation of merit. This is exactly what I want to tell everyone. Between helplessness and refuge lies a profound secret of practice. This profound mystery concerns the liberation of sentient beings and the true essence of the Dharma." The Buddha also demonstrated to the people, his gaze filled with wisdom and compassion. He continued, "Let us continue with the story of the merchant. Do you think that once merchants deposit their wealth into a bank, they have completely let go of their attachment to their possessions? Do they still care about the bank's business conditions? Do they worry about the bank's collapse? Do they still keep their wealth in mind? Of course not. A bhikkhu who has attained the path merely changes the way he manages finances. He still cares about finances and remains attached to them, only that this attachment becomes more covert and indirect." That's right, the Buddha nodded approvingly. So, does this change have significance? Is this change a progression or a regression? Is this change liberation or bondage? Suddenly, Shariputra spoke. "World-honored one, I understand now. Although the merchant has not completely relinquished attachment, his transformation is the first step toward letting go. He began to learn trust, to let go, and to rely on others. If one does not even dare to take this first step, how can one truly let go? How can one truly attain liberation?" The Buddha revealed an approving smile and said, "Precisely so. Sentient beings are immersed in the sea of suffering, ensnared by afflictions and burdened by attachments. If one wishes to ascend to enlightenment in a single step by immediately letting go of all attachments, how easy is that? It is like asking someone who has never climbed a mountain to suddenly reach the summit. Doesn't that sound like a fool's dream? Taking refuge in the three jewels is precisely the first step for sentient beings to enter the realm free from defilements. Just like the merchant who entrusts his wealth to the bank for safekeeping, it may appear on the surface as another form of attachment, but in reality, it is a step toward liberation. Similarly, sentient beings taking refuge in the three jewels may appear to foster attachment to the Dharma, but in fact, it marks the very beginning of the path toward the cessation of defilements. By taking refuge in the three jewels, sentient beings can receive the blessings of the Buddha's teachings, gain the support of the Sangha, and acquire the wisdom of the Dharma. All of these help sentient beings relinquish attachments and ultimately reach the state of non-self. A young bhikkhu, seemingly enlightened, said, "It's like taking a boat to cross a river. Although eventually, one must leave the boat. If one does not first get on the boat, how can one cross the sea of suffering? Without the aid of a boat, how can one possibly reach the other shore?" Well said, well said. The Buddha praised. "You have already realized the profound truth within. Taking refuge in the three jewels is precisely the Dharma boat for sentient beings, the means by which they cross the sea of birth and death suffering. When you truly reach the other shore, you will naturally let go of the boat, no longer needing its aid. But before that, without this boat, how could you cross the vast sea of birth and death? And how could you reach the shore of liberation? Suddenly, Shariputra stood up, joined his hands respectfully, and said, "O blessed one, I understand now. Helplessness is the goal, and taking refuge is the method." Seemingly contradictory, yet essentially unified. Just like that old woman, he believes that the doctor does not cling to the illness, but seeks to better let go of the suffering. Taking refuge in the three jewels is not about attachment to rituals or practices, but rather to better attain a state of selfless surrender. The Buddha smiled and said, "Moreover, there is a deeper connection between taking refuge and helplessness. This connection pertains to the essence of practice and the true meaning of liberation." The entire assembly was enveloped in silence, with everyone attentively listening, fearful of missing even a single word spoken by the Buddha. When you truly understand the meaning of taking refuge, you will realize that taking refuge itself is a practice of helplessness. True refuge is not attachment to forms, but the recognition of truth. It is not reliance on external factors, but awakening within the mind. True refuge is to relinquish the self, merge into the Dharma realm, and become one with the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha's voice grew increasingly solemn, like the resonant clang of a great bell, shaking the hearts of all who heard. Just like the merchant who, after depositing his wealth in the bank, not only gained peace of mind, but, more importantly, learned to trust. He trusts the credibility of the bank, trusts the bank's capability, and trusts the bank's responsibility. Similarly, when you take refuge in the three jewels, it appears that you are seeking reliance, but in truth, you are learning to let go. Let go of attachment to the self, relinquish worldly desires, and release the fear of afflictions. You entrust yourselves to the Dharma, to the Sangha, and to the truth. When you fully understand the true meaning of taking refuge, you will realize that taking refuge and the beginningless nature are two sides of the same coin, inseparable. Taking refuge in the Buddha is not clinging to the Buddha's form, but realizing the Buddha nature inherently present within oneself. Buddha nature is pure, luminous, and wise. By taking refuge in the Buddha, we can awaken our Buddha nature, open our wisdom, and illuminate our mind. Taking refuge in the Dharma is not about attachment to the words of the scriptures, but about realizing the guidance of truth. Dharma is the path to liberation, the source of wisdom, and the embodiment of compassion. By taking refuge, we can learn the wisdom of the Dharma, grasp the methods of liberation, and embark on the path to liberation. Taking refuge in the Sangha is not about attachment to external forms, but about integrating into the community of awakened beings. The Sangha is pure, harmonious, and progressive. By taking refuge in the Sangha, we can receive the support of the monastic community, learn from their experience, progress together, and attain liberation collectively. Such taking refuge itself is a practice of no self. Because in this kind of refuge, there is no self, no attachment, only the pursuit of truth and the longing for liberation. Shariputra suddenly attained enlightenment and said excitedly, "So it is. Non-self does not mean rejecting everything, and taking refuge is not about relying on others. True refuge is recognizing the original mind. True helplessness is letting go of attachments. The two may appear opposite, but in truth, they complement each other. Like two wings, neither can be lacking. Only when both are present can one fly freely." The Buddha nodded with satisfaction and said, "Yes, it is like the ocean and its waves. Waves appear to move, change, and arise and cease, but in essence, they never leave the ocean. Waves are a part of the ocean. The ocean is the whole of the waves." Similarly, taking refuge may seem like an act of assistance and attachment, but true refuge can lead you to the state of selflessness. True refuge is the integration with the Buddha's teachings, the unity with ultimate truth. In this state, there is no self, no attachment, only purity, only light, only liberation. At this moment, outside the window, the sunlight was just right, a gentle breeze stirred, and the leaves of the Bodhi tree rustled softly. Everyone inside the meditation hall was deeply engrossed in contemplation. They finally understood the relationship between refuge and no-self, grasping the true essence of practice. They realized that the connection between taking refuge and no-self is like climbing a mountain to enjoy the scenery. You must ascend step by step to ultimately reach the realm where all other mountains appear small in comparison. Taking refuge is the process of ascent. Non-anger is the state reached afterward. Without the process of climbing, there is no joy in reaching the destination. The young novice suddenly asked, Bhagwan, does this mean that we need not rush to attain a state free from affliction, but should first begin with taking refuge, progressing step by step in our practice? The Buddha compassionately said, Well done. You have already understood the profound truth within. Just as a farmer plants crops, only through the processes of flowering and fruiting, along with sunlight and rain, can a harvest finally be achieved. Similarly, through sincere refuge and diligent practice, you will naturally attain the ultimate state beyond attachment. This is not a contradiction, but a necessary path in the practice. As long as you persist unceasingly and diligently cultivate, one day you will relinquish all attachments and attain supreme enlightenment. The Buddha's teachings were like a sudden enlightenment, opening the minds of all the monastics and filling them with the joy of Dharma. They all rose respectfully, bowed to the Buddha, and expressed their gratitude. Within the wondrous and startling karmic connection, the resonance arises once more, echoing throughout the void, lingering for a long time without dispersing.